Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. We're on our 9th workshop on the water use efficiency standards, and it's been a while since we've met. We kind of had a pause there for quite a few months as we waited for some actions by the state, but we're going to kind of dust off our notes and figure out where we're at and give some updates on what's going on and what we're looking forward to in the next year. So just to start out with, we'll go over some, next slide, please. Hold on. Maybe. So we're going to have updates from the state board and DWR. We're going to look a little bit at the indoor standards update and the legislation that was recently passed. Tomorrow, we're going to have the water loss standards adopted by the state board, and Mina's going to give us an update on those. Michelle's going to talk about CII classification and some options on how you can meet that requirement moving forward. And then we have a resource cheat sheet and some surveys to do, and then we'll wrap up. So we're really happy that you're all here with us this morning, and we'll go ahead and get right in. Next slide, please. Just real quick, some Zoom rules. Make sure that you have your first and last name on there so we know who we're talking to. If you can, please turn on your video when we're speaking so we can see your face. Stay on mute if you're not talking so that we can all hear the speakers who are talking. Be aware of background noise, and the chat panel is a great place to put questions or comments or anything that you want to have responded to, and you can also open that and see what others are saying, and again use the chat panel. Next slide. So way back when, several months ago, we did a survey and we asked, where is everybody comfortable? How are you guys feeling about these rather complex and data intense standards that are being developed? And what we heard is that there's a couple of areas that are people are very comfortable with, some areas that people would like some more information on. They're not quite feeling real comfortable, and then some areas where everyone's feeling great, and we don't need to spend a whole lot of time covering those. Today, we are going to take some time to focus on a few areas. We're going to start with the water loss economic model and the water loss questionnaires. And the reason we're going to do that is because those are about ready to be approved by the state board. That's going to happen tomorrow, anytime after noon. So if you are interested in seeing those final recommendations and seeing the approval, make sure that you turn into the state board meeting tomorrow and pay attention to that. Make comments if you have any, and we'll see what gets adopted tomorrow. The other area we're going to look at, again, this is an area that's kind of a lot of people are like saying, hey, we'd like some more help with that, is the CII classifications. And Michelle has been doing some work across the state on with many agencies to see who's doing what to get those classifications in, and she's going to give a presentation on that. Next slide, please. First, we're going to do a quick drop in at the drought. I think that's an area that impacts all of us. First, the Department of Water Resources has put together a new website to just give information about hydraulic conditions, forecasts, information about local watersheds. That water website is right there. It's called California Water Watch, and you can see the link right there. Again, it just kind of looks at local and statewide water conditions. Next slide, please. Just also want to talk about the long-term strategy that the governor just recently released in August. It's a response to continuing dry conditions. It's more of looking at the resiliency portfolio and say, hey, how are we going to adapt that to make sure that we can meet the challenges coming forward as we have a hotter, drier future. And so there's a list of specific actions that need to be taken to address water loss by 2040, new supplies, and and also conservation and what needs to be done for that. Next slide, please. So just looking at it again, we're looking at developing new water supplies, desalination, recycled water, storage, recharging groundwater, reservoir storage, and then we have reduce urban and agricultural water use, and that's kind of where we stand right now with water use efficiency and for urban uses. And so with that, it was really implement the 2018 water use efficiency standards, which is what we're here to talk about, to in 2030 save 500,000 acre feet of demand, and then finally that have some information in there about forecasting, data collection, and management of water. Next slide, please. So in addition to talking about implementing the 2018 legislation, the long-term water use efficiency standards, the governor's strategy also required the state board to develop potential water emergency standards that might need to be put into place next year if we continue in this dry area. And the requirement would consider the relative efficiency of each supplier. It would develop new efficiency targets that are based on the long-term standards and account for all the differences in climate. And so right now it's in progress developing these water use efficiency targets. What we're hearing is that it'll probably be focused on residential targets because that's where we have the information. We have landscape area measurements, we have population, and we have both those kind of targets tentatively set. And so we'll be working with the state board over the next several months and developing what those emergency conservation standards are going to be and how they're going to be based on the long-term standards. Next slide, please. All right, now we're heading out on our water use efficiency road trip. Again, this has been a long road trip. We've been felt like we've been stuck in traffic for the last couple of months, kind of waiting for the state to take action, the state board to move on the water loss standards, the legislation to determine what the indoor standards are going to be, and then DWR to make its final recommendations to the state board for the remainder of the water use efficiency standards. So let's go ahead and dive in, tell us where we're at. DWR provided information about what its recommendations are for long-term standards for outdoor variances and CII and dedicated meters. All of that was released on September 29th, 2022. We are waiting for quite a bit of backup materials with that. So some of the details are still a little fuzzy when you're looking at variances and some of the other areas. The state board has been real clear that they're going to start looking at that next year. So we kind of have a little bit of a resting period here so we can start to look at those recommendations, see how they might impact us, see what kind of information we might need to collect over the next couple of months so that when we go to the state board and they're listening to our concerns, we might have some data to back up what our concerns are. And then we're also waiting for information on how we're going to collect those urban water use objectives and what's going to be included in the calculation and what's not. And so those are still some to be determined information. Next slide. We're going to go through again step by step as we've done in the past. Some of them will kind of just give a quick brush over. Some of them will come back later and do a deep dive into, and some will just kind of give you the latest update. So we're going to start with step 1 through 4, and that's water supply, demand and assessment, outdoor standards for the residential, dedicated irrigation meter standards, and mixed use meters. So let's go ahead and get started with step 1, supply and demand assessment. And the good news is for this year, we're done. We can check that off our list. Those have been submitted. We won't have to do anything for that until next year when we once again submit our information in July. So The importance of this supply and demand assessment, if you haven't had a chance to, DWR has released that information, so you can kind of look and see how many agencies are having challenges this year, how many look like they have a good handle on what they're doing, and maybe have had the opportunity to develop some more local supplies, and how people are implementing their water shortage contingency plan. I think it's really telling that our water shortage contingency plans are really working, in that those that have to reduce demand this year to respond to supply conditions are able to do that by, again, relying on their local ordinances and their local water shortage contingency plan. So check that off the list. They've been submitted back in June, and we don't have to do that until next spring. We'll be submitting those again in June of 2023. Next slide. Residential outdoor standards. This is one of the standards that the state board or DWR released, recommendations that'll go to the state board. The next step on this is the DWR is releasing its recommendations and its reports and everything that it did to determine these standards. And then the state board is going to pick them up, start the regulatory process, allow opportunities to provide comments, provide information and input into these. And that's going to be our opportunity moving forward, that if there's something that we really are concerned about, that we can start to address that. Pretty much the standards were what we were expecting, 0.8 evapotranspiration adjustment factor through 2029. The 2030 target went down just a tad from 0.65 to 0.63. And then we have an ETAF for a new landscape, and that's landscape that was put into place after 2020. So again, that's something that you might want to think about. How would we account for these new landscapes? Obviously, they weren't measured as part of the 2018 landscape area measurements. As we put together those numbers, and as we try to figure out how we're going to calculate all this stuff, how is that going to fit into our equation? And so any challenges you think you might have, or information that we need from DWR or the state board, this is the time to really start collecting that and putting our list together, so that when we go for comments, we are equipped with some good data and some good information to say to the state board is, this is the area that we need help in, because we can't do that on our own, and these are the areas that we have a good handle on. Next slide, please. Sorry about that. Okay, again, landscape area measurements, this DWR pretty much considers those done. If you have not gotten them yet, or if you are still unhappy with them, I encourage you to reach out to DWR. I will tell you that they're only looking if there is if the improvements or the changes that you're looking for, they'll only really consider them if you can kind of show that they have a really significant impact on the total number of landscape, or the total amount of landscape area for your entire agency. So if it's just 1 or 2 lots, or even a couple dozen lots, you have to kind of show that that's going to impact your bottom line when it comes to calculating targets. And if not, and if that's the case, I really encourage you to reach out to DWR. If you aren't successful in doing that, please contact me and send me an email and kind of say, hey, this is the person we've contacted. We haven't had any success with that. And we'll see what we can do to kind of get DWR to give us a response to that. Next slide, please. Again, review your landscape area measurements. If there are any significant errors developed, maybe calculate your target. There's some online tools for that. See where you're at, see if there's anything that you're really concerned about. What are the variances that you might need to start looking in and collecting information on? All of those are going to be important. Again, I think next year is going to go by really fast, and we're going to be calculating these targets sooner rather than later. So I wouldn't wait on all this stuff. I would really start to put together your to-do list, and especially if you need a variance, those are going to be really data intensive, and getting information to DWR about what you need and how they can assist you is going to be important moving forward. Next slide, please. Dedicated irrigation meter standards, again, pretty much same as the residential standards. nothing that we really expected any changes on. The only area that is different than the residential is special landscape areas. So that's any area that's irrigated by recycled water, or if it's play yard, or if it's something that's got a school playground or something like that, that maybe needs a higher allocation because it's got turf that's used a lot and it really needs to be irrigated and kept healthy in order to serve its purpose. And that would be for sports fields and things like that. And so that is one of the things that, again, moving forward, that you might want to look at and see if you can identify any of those special landscape areas. Next slide, please. So we do have a little bit of a break in the DWR's recommendations. They gave us 5 years after adoption to measure all these landscape areas. So previously we were thinking they had to be measured by 2024. This kind of gives us a little bit of breathing room so that we have 5 years to do all the measurements of dedicated landscape meters. Again, as you're doing those measurements, make sure that you're identifying and measuring any special landscape areas. Next slide, please. Now, converting mixed use meters. This is going to be another area that I think is going to be a little bit of a challenge, and we're going to want to be able to work with the state board as they put this into place to make sure that we have variances and in lieu technologies and all of that stuff really well defined, so that we're not required to do a lot of work that may not be cost effective. Michelle's going to do that, provide information on that and later on. And next slide. I see that we have a question popping up, and it's about whether or not DWR is going to be measuring the dedicated landscape meters. They are planning on it, it sounds like right now. It sounds like they got some money for it. Again, it's one of those things that, you kind of wait for them, or you can, move forward with doing them on your own if you want to have if you think you might be able to come up with better information than DWR. So they are kind of tentatively planning to measure that landscape area measurement for those dedicated meters, but details are still to be worked out. So moving forward, again, you have a little bit more time to identify the mixed use meters and the CII dedicated meters and measure those. We have another 5 years or so plus. Make sure that you're looking at your compliance pathway, that whether it's going to be converting meters and in lieu technology or other options, that you've got that plan in place and you're ready to do that 20% per year. And again, really, as we're looking forward to putting these into regulations in the next year, identify the concerns that you have with implementation and quantify your impacts. That's really what the state board has really said. They want to know not only if you'll have impacts, but what's the size of the impacts, how they will, how they will affect your bottom line, how it could affect your affordability, all of that. And this is an area where, just separating a mixed use meter isn't always a path to getting your conservation. And so making sure that we have those in lieu technologies and those areas that we can do something other than just, doing that sometimes very complex exercise of separating out meters is going to be important as this is implemented. Next slide. I see there's some questions in the chat, and I was supposed to stop previously, but if there's any questions or comments that anyone wants to make.
We do have one other one, Elizabeth. Okay. Brent Reyes asked on slide 16, stating that DWR is providing the landscape area measurement for CII dedicated meters. Is that true?
It is. I'm going to say quantitatively, yes, it should be true. They did get funding in the last budget, and they do have plans to provide the CII measurements.
Great, thank you. That's the only other question that we have in the chat currently.
Okay, great. Anyone want to raise their hand? Give you a couple seconds. All right, great. We'll go ahead and move forward with stop 5 through 7, sorry. And talk about a little bit about water loss. Again, Mina's going to do a deep dive on that, and we'll go into that more, but I will just kind of let you know where we're at with that. Next slide. Water loss economic model. We've seen that updated in the last several months. The state board has published their final draft and is looking to adopt the regulation that's based on this economic model tomorrow afternoon. We did get quite a few changes on that economic model. It's not perfect by anyone's definition, but we were able to get quite a few standards, and Mina will kind of go changes, and Mina will go into them. And so again, if you have any big concerns, go ahead and contact me, and we'll see what we can do about making sure that those get into the record tomorrow. Next slide, please. You know, I think for actions, if you haven't already been, and I think everyone pretty much should be, make sure that you're submitting your annual water loss audits to DWR. Those are going to feed into the model and going to give you information about your targets and your baseline. Make sure that if you have any real outliers and real losses or missing information, make sure that you're contacting the state board earlier rather than later. If you have changes, if you can get them in before tomorrow at noon, then they will be less scrutinized than if you get them in after tomorrow at noon. So just make sure that you're talking to state board staff if you have some issues there. And then again, review the economic model, provide any new information that you have or updates if that is the path that you want to take. And again, prior to tomorrow, it's going to be easier to get adjustments than after tomorrow. So, and I'm not even sure if they can even get it in at this point, but you can give it a try. Mick, we'll go real quick, and you have a question.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, on this item about water loss audits, I know the Water Authority is partnering with eSource on a program. What is that actually going to look like in terms of helping us review our audits? I know for me, I've been preparing the audits for many years, and I know that they're looking at data from 17 to 20 with the ability to throw out 1 year. And I was sort of hopeful that that assistance program, the Water Authority and eSource, would enable me to basically review what I've already submitted and validated. So is that sort of the intent of that program, or if it's different, could you maybe help clarify?
That is the intent, and actually Mina will be covering that, and we actually have eSource on the line, I believe, as well today. So we're going to go over that a little bit later in the presentation. So great question, thank you. All right, next slide. Questionnaires, again, there's going to be questionnaires on pressure assistant and management that are going to have to be filled out. This is one of those things that I really encourage that you look at. You see the information that's needed. A lot of agencies may not have that information real handily available and might need some extra time to start to collect that information. You know, the first date it's due, July 1st, 2024. That seems like a distance away, but it really, the time will go fast. And so starting to look at some of your pressure and your asset management information, I think will go quite a bit of ways to helping you answer these questionnaires. Next slide, please. Finally, we have variance calculations. DWR kind of put in its recommendations to the state board that there should be variance calculations. They asked for a couple of small changes, but didn't have a whole lot of detail. So we're kind of still waiting on those variances and what's it gonna take to calculate them, and how are they going to fit into the long-term standard. One of the things we're going to want to work with the state board with is to make sure that the DWR is recommending that variances only apply if they affect more than 5% of your use. But we want to make sure that if you have 3 variances and stacked together, they perhaps, you know, are 7 to 10% of your use, that you can use those too, that if the sum of the variance is greater than 5%, that should also be considered as well. So that's something we've heard from a lot of people, and we'll continue to work with the state board to try and make sure that that gets into the final recommendations or final regulations. Next slide, please. Okay, we'll take a pause again, see if there's any questions.
No more questions. Thank you.
No more questions. Great. Okay, we're going to stop at 7 and 8 and 9, and we're going to have CII classifications and best practices. Oh, Brian. I see your hand up.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, I had some questions in the chat. I guess they're not coming through. A quick question on the outdoor calculations of what we'll be receiving for the effective precipitation and for the average ETO. Have you seen those numbers?
I have not seen individual numbers for water suppliers. I've seen they've DWR shared the formula, but they have not shared final information. So we'll continue to kind of look for that. I believe they are included in the calculator that the state board has put together. So if you're kind of curious, you can't really dive into the details there, but it at least gives you a kind of a ballpark number. If you look at a couple of years, it's about what those numbers might look like. Yeah,
that's what I've been playing with and trying to get into there. I emailed their email on that page to get some clarification, because I tried to back into some of the numbers they're providing, but it's pretty far off from what our precipitation would be. So I haven't gotten an answer back yet, but yeah, that's something we really need to know so we can fully understand, how that calculation is being developed, well, not developed, but how the CIMIS information and where they're getting it from, and because that's really going to change our outdoor, any of our outdoor calculations. So
exactly. Okay, great. Thanks. So I'm glad to hear that you're doing that, and I'll follow up with you offline after this meeting to kind of see what you're seeing versus what's in their calculator.
okay.
If we have issues with their calculator, we want to make sure that we're letting them know that we have concerns. So
Okay, thanks.
yeah, perfect. All right. Anyone else? Okay. CII classifications and CII best practices. I'm just going to go over these real quick, and then Michelle's going to do again a deeper dive on them later on in our meeting. So classifications. Again, you have 5 years to classify all your CII meters. There's 19 classification categories, and they have a water-centric standard. This might be a challenge for some people that don't currently have their meters classified as anything. And so this again is Michelle's going to start to give you some things to start to think about moving forward to how you might be able to do this in a cost-effective and a way that works for your agency. Next slide, please. Again, CII classifications are going to be, you're going to have 5 years to map all of them and then report on them as part of the CII performance measures. Next slide, please. There's going to be a lot of reporting with this standard, both the CII and the calculations every year for the other standards. So, and I just got saw the question from Cliff or from Clay, and the dates for compliance. I believe they give you 5 years after adoption, so we kind of need to know when they get adopted. We're assuming next year, but so that would give you, about 2028 is what we're looking at. CII best practices, again, that's going to be kind of really up to local agencies to determine what their best practices are going to be. DWR has tried to get a lot of flexibility in there and really left it up to the water supplier as how they're going to implement those best practices, and understanding that we can't always control what CII customers do. We can't force them to implement our recommendations or even let us do an audit. So it's one of those things that we have some flexibility in there, but we want to make sure that we're meeting the state's requirements. Next slide. So calculating water targets, just a reminder, your target is going to be based on indoor use, outdoor residential use, CII landscape use for dedicated meters and water loss, plus any variances, plus if you have potable reuse projects, you are eligible for a bonus up to 15%, depending on when your project came online. And that's going to have your unique water target for each individual agency. And so next slide. We're going to go over the indoor use, and is what we're going to look at. That was actually recently adopted through legislation, changed quite a bit. And so we're going to have some look at what those targets are. Those already have been set. All right. I'm looking at those initially back in 2018, the legislation put the targets at 2020 would be 55 gallons per capita per day. For 2025, it would be 52.5, and 2030 it would go down to 50 gallons per capita per day. The DWR and the Water Board put together recommendations based on the studies that they did, saying that the indoor use should drop from 55 gallons per capita per day in 2020 down to 42 gallons per capita per day in 2030. Again, because the initial standards were adopted by legislation back in 2018, they had to be changed through legislation. In September of this year, 1157 was approved and passed and signed in by the governor that implemented those new gallons per capita per day targets for indoor use. One of the things that we were able to get into the legislation is the requirement for studies and reports. For those of you that were real familiar and followed closely the indoor standards and the report that the State Board and DWR did, is that they looked at some of the impacts that there might be with changing the targets on wastewater and recycled water and other areas, but they didn't really quantify those impacts. And so we're going to take it, we're hoping, we're going to work with DWR to do a deeper dive and get them to take a look at what's the cost of all those impacts, how would they have to be mitigated. You know, we know that we could do anything with enough time and money, but let's look and see what kind of time and money we're going to need to address some of the concerns that others might have, especially when you're looking at water that's already being recycled or that's already part of a potable reuse project. You know, how can we account for those kind of different conditions across the state? Next slide, please. Okay, and click one more time. There we go. The next thing we're going to look at is water loss. And again, this is unique in that for all the other standards, they're going to be met as one target. So you're going to add it all together. You're going to have one total target, and you can decide whether to focus on meeting your target through CII or through indoor use or through outdoor use. As long as you're under that target, you've met the target. You don't have to meet it in each individual area. The exception to that is water loss, because water loss was implemented through SB 555, legislation that was passed before the 2018 legislation. It's been decided that you have to meet your water loss target in addition to your overall water use efficiency target. Now, you can't be penalized for not meeting both your water loss and your water use efficiency target. They can only penalize you for one or the other. But even if you're way under or right at your unique water target, and if you're not meeting your water loss target, you could actually still be eligible for penalties under the new standards. So that's something to keep in mind as we're looking at water loss. Again, it's different than all the rest of the parts of the standards. This is the one area that has to be met independently in addition to the total water loss target. Next slide. So we're going to give a deep dive kind of update on water loss. And for that, I have Mina with us. She is a new part of the San Diego County Water Authority team. She's a senior management analyst and has been here a couple months, and we're really great, happy to have her on our team. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Mina.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Good morning, everyone. My name is Mina CII, and as Elizabeth mentioned, I will talk a little bit more about water loss performance standards updates. Please, next slide. Thank you. So, and one more, please. Perfect. So where does water loss fit in water use efficiency? It's one of the components of water use objective, and it's a unique target value that is set for each agency or each supplier. As Elizabeth mentioned, the water loss values are based on Senate Bill 555, and it can be enforced as part of the standard or independently, not both at the same time. Next, please. So these updates that we are talking about is based on the comment periods that we had this year. The primary comment periods was in February, and the second one was in September. After that second comment period, a draft proposal and updated water loss models was released in September. And we are waiting for tomorrow to that the updates will be adopted by State Water Board. If you need to see the details of the updates and more information on that, please visit the State Water Board website and please check your numbers. Next, please. So what are the components of these latest updates? First and foremost, the standard updates are specific to supplier, and also the economic model used for water loss has been updated, which is in compliance by 2028. And as Elizabeth mentioned, the questionnaires has 3 sections, and each section has a due date. The data quality of questionnaires is due by 2023. The asset management is due by 2024, and the pressure management is due by 2027. And the adjustments to these updated economic model is due by July 2023. Also the variances that we briefly talked about. So the alternative pathway for suppliers with low loss and high data quality is considered in the latest update. Next, please. So what does it cover, these latest changes? First and foremost, the ongoing adjustments will go beyond 2023, and the reason is to recognize and incentivize data quality improvements. Also, a compliance pathway has created for real water loss if the supplier's water loss standard is lower than the supplier's average baseline by 30% or more. And I will talk more about it. What does it mean? And also a guidance and process has been created for submitting supplier-specific input data for the economic model. So there will be templates for supplier for apparent loss inventory and also leak registry submissions. The terms are clarified to include ICF, apparent and real loss, and also loss and also leakage definitions. The time extension is considered for newly consolidated systems. There is flexibility for meter testing requirements for suppliers to consider the off-ramp option. The exemption for some small systems, still like we have some concerns, but there are more exemption in the latest updates. And lastly, the leak registry reporting was required every year. Now it's required every 3 years. Next, please. Perfect. So to summarize, there are 2 big changes. One, the target values have been updated and released in September, which were based on the stakeholders' comments, and also the water loss economic model was revised and updated, and it's released in September as well. In the latest model that was released, there are major changes in the updated targets, and please download the latest update from the State Water Board website, and if there is any issue with any part that I described, please reach out to me. Next, please. So here I want to show why every agency and supplier needs to check their number and why are we going through these details. As you can see in this graph shows the target values, the latest target values versus the real loss submitted by member agencies. The blue, green, and gray bars are showing the real loss data for 2019, 2020, and 2021 respectively. And the red triangle shows the latest target values released for 2022. So as you can see, for most member agencies and supplier, we have a long run to meet and improve our data to match the latest data submitted. Next, please. So what is our next step? The good news is that we have the targeted value specific to each agency and supplier. Now, what do we need to do to meet those target values and manage our variances to be closer to the values that are set for each agency? In this regard, Water Authority has partnered up with eSource, as Mick mentioned, to further water loss expertise for our member agency and also do the collaboration among the agencies. And in this regard, eSource is developing a program to assist member agency to meet their target values. Next, please. And by that, we will have bi-monthly meetings. Our first kickoff meeting with member agency will be November 1st at 1 p.m. The official meeting invitation has been sent this morning. If you haven't received, or if you know additional people or agencies who need to be included, please forward the meeting invitation. If you haven't received it or you want to be included, please reach out to me. There is a question, best contact. Yeah, you can reach out to me or Elizabeth with any question related to water loss for these specific meetings that we will hold in collaboration with eSource. You can definitely reach out to me. My email address is provided here. And what does it cover? This regional water loss control group meetings and collaboration that we are doing with eSource has two aspects. One, the meetings that helps and allow all member agencies to develop additional water loss expertise via presentations, and also to do the peer exchange. And also we will have technical assistance by eSource to help them, and this is optional for member agency to be included in water audit compilation and validation, to also check and reevaluate the component analysis of real and apparent losses, for billing data assessment, for water loss standards, compliance, leak detection, and anything detection and anything related to water loss updates that we've seen. So please reach out to us. We would love to hear from our member agency. We are here to help member agencies to meet their goals. And with that, I finish my part of presentation.
And just to add to that really quickly, the portion of the eSource, just kind of go to the question we had earlier. eSource, we're going to have bi-monthly meetings, kind of go over the topics, and then we're also going to have eSource is going to kind of do like a small quick audit on each of the member agencies to kind of put together some recommendations that look like that might help you as you meet your target. And so they're going to be setting up the appointments for that in the next couple of months moving forward. So November 1st is our kickoff meeting. We'll have more details there and go over that. It looks like.
Elizabeth, we do have one additional question. Melissa asked, who did the invites go to for this upcoming meeting of member agencies? So I guess what list did you base that on, or who at their agency should have received that invitation?
We went based on, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mina, we went based on the audits that were submitted and the contact for the agency that was listed in the audit. So
yes.
Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. And anyone related to those, if we ever received an email or anybody ever contacted us related to conservation or water loss.
Okay.
Yes.
Did it go to the conservation group?
Yes, we had a list, and then eSource also came up with a list that they had, and basically we matched and made sure we are covering.
Okay.
Everyone.
So if you didn't get that email and you think you should have, please contact Mina and we'll make sure it gets to you. And then
Absolutely. Thanks, Elizabeth. And I just wanted to mention this wasn't the final list. These were the lists that we had based on any contact or any information so far. So please, if you think you or someone in your agency needs to be added, there is no limitation on who can join these meetings. Thank you.
Is there a question, Mac, or are you?
Yeah, no, thanks, Mina, for the update. And then just to sort of build on the discussion we're having about contacts, Kim Monago with eSource actually reached out to me the other day, letting me know that she was having a hard time reaching the pertinent staff at agencies. So it sounds like there's a little bit of a communication gap. So I'm not exactly sure how to close that. I know you guys have reached me. I'm the staffer for FPUD, but there may be an opportunity to maybe do a little bit more outreach to the member agencies to make sure. And I would say it's also really important to communicate exactly what this is doing. So some of even the outreach that I've gotten has been to me a little bit vague. But I think if you link it to the urban water use objective and just sort of, frame it within the greater context of what we're all trying to do with meeting compliance with that, I think that might be helpful to reach the pertinent staff.
That's
Absolutely.
great. Thanks for that feedback. Go ahead.
And sorry, I just wanted to mention in the official meeting invitation that I just sent, we have an agenda with more details of what we are going through. And again, this is the kickoff meeting. What we want to hear is what agency needs from us. So basically that kickoff meeting would help everyone to kind of guide what, if there is any specific information we need to cover in next meetings. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, next slide. Water use classifications. Michelle, take it away.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. So we are going to have, I'm going to give a summary, and then we're going to have a little bit of time for a dialogue. So the CII water use classifications, I'm going to give a little bit of more detail. Elizabeth gave us a nice high-level summary earlier, and now I'm going to kind of dive into what does that mean and how do we actually start implementing it. So it came out of the state legislations, and they identified 19 categories. So the 19 categories are basically defined, and they are pretty broad at this point. So I'm going to kind of step through them one at a time. Oh, and that's the piece that we're going to be talking about today. There are two other pieces of the CII compliance. So CII is not officially part of the equation. So the equation sheet that we showed calculating the urban water use objective earlier had multiple components. You might have noticed that commercial was missing. They have taken the approach that commercial water use is needed in our state. It is part of our economic makeup of our larger overall approach on the state, and they don't want to have an economic impact by forcing people to reduce their commercial water use. So instead of having a numeric target, they have set up 3 additional elements of things that we have to comply with, but they aren't necessarily a quantifiable reduction or number that's going to get added to your urban water use objective. So this is required. It is in parallel to your urban water use objective numerical value that you will have to reach, but these are the 3 elements of commercial. I'm going to talk today about the first one that's highlighted in black here. That addition, there are 2 other things. If you didn't catch our workshop number 8, we can share recording. We did have Lisa Cuela, who's here today, do a nice walkthrough the CII and dedicated irrigation meters element, and a little bit on the best management practices. There will be a handout from the BMPs, hasn't been released yet. It's one of those detailed documents Elizabeth talked about. When that comes out, we'll probably have an additional workshop kind of diving through all that information once it's actually been released. But again, we'll focus on just the first of the 3 topics today. All right, so with that being said, they have released 19 water use classification categories. So we're going to step through them one at a time and what they look like. And then we're going to give you 4 different case studies, one from Northern California, one from Central California, one from Texas, and one from Utah, and how it actually goes when we're practicing this, and what are some of the areas that we think we can work as a team to hopefully make this a useful process and hopefully not too complicated and confusing. So that's what we're here to talk about today. So first of all, first category is water recreation. This could be public pools and water parks. They can have a few customers, but they can be quite large in water use. So they have their own category. The second one is recreation, non-water. So that could be, large athletic facilities, sports fields, things like that, but not necessarily like a water park. So they can be large, also large water users, not a huge number in most people's service areas, but again, deserving their own category because they are definitely unique if you have some and can be a large water use. The third category is food and beverage. This is by and large, most people are interpreting to be mostly restaurants, and they could be different types of restaurants like full service restaurants and fast food. We'll get into the details of this in just a moment. On the beverage side, some people, and maybe we need further clarification on where you put like a beverage manufacturer. So if you have like a Budweiser plant, for example, is that more of a manufacturer, which is all further down the list, or is that truly beverage? And so we'll talk about that in just a minute. Laundry. So laundry, laundromats, commercial, industrial laundries are having their own unique element. Lodging. This is hospitality and retirement homes. Healthcare. This is hospitals, medical office, medical laboratories, equipment, and processes. Is a little bit interesting when you go to number 7, which is also offices. So sometimes people are talking about the distinction between medical office and regular office. I will show you an example of where that can get a little bit confusing, which is which. And office is pretty general, so we're going to talk a little bit about that too. Public services, that's government, prisons, and correctional facilities, in addition to a few other things that we'll talk about. Sales, that's actually quite a big category, amazingly enough. Lots fit into that. This is just a few retail, shopping centers, malls, grocery stores, and food markets. Grocery stores tend to have a lot of impact on that category, as they can be a large user compared to like a retail store, for example, that does just employees and a couple toilets. Services, auto and personal services. This category also has some unique elements of what would fit and wouldn't fit in there. We will take a deep dive on that one. So this is the first 10. And again, you'll have this in your notes, and I will be going over this one more time as well, talking about how we're applying it. So number 11 is religious buildings. 12 is deemed education. It doesn't say which level, but just education. So we'll talk a little bit about how to further define that. Vehicle wash, industrial non-manufacturing. So this could be like warehouses or non-temperature controlled warehouses. We say non-temperature controlled because if you have temperature controlled, sometimes it can use a lot of water in that cooling process. And that may fall more into manufacturing. So manufacturing is has a lot of things on this list, but the one thing we notice it's missing is beverage. And so that might be something. It has beverage manufacturing listed, but beverage was also listed earlier. So that's a little bit of a conflict, and we may be further trying to define that as a group, what distinguishes beverage versus beverage manufacturing. And so there's a lot of different things that can fit under manufacturing, of course, and a lot of them are listed here, but I'm sure there's additional things that could qualify as manufacturing. Utility, we'll be talking about what falls under that. Mixed use commercial. This one, a lot of people talk about strip malls and that they're challenging because there can be a whole bunch of things in there, including restaurants inside your strip mall. But this is, if you have just 1 meter for a whole bunch of sites, then most of people would deem that as a strip mall. We got shopping centers, commercial spaces that are a little tricky because a lot of times they will change in and out quite often. the average use or life of a restaurant in the state of California is about 7 years. So that means over time, and if you're looking long term, that they can change out many, many times, and maybe it switches to a restaurant and maybe it switches to something else entirely. So that does make the characteristic of shopping malls and shopping centers and strip malls quite interesting in that they can change over time, and their water use can flux accordingly. Dedicated irrigation meters, if you do have them, that would go into category 18 to try and isolate the irrigation only water use. And then we have other. So yeah, so other is a fun one. So if it doesn't list in any of the other 18, then you can put it in other. I have personally been working on some of these, and amazingly enough, there are some things that will fall under here. I found some like agriculture, like floriculture, people that raise flowers, some planting nurseries and things that really just didn't fit in any of the other categories. So, and they can be large water users as well. And so we'll show you some additional examples of things that have been just fitting in other. So, all right. So how do we do the classification, and who can help us? So I'm going to give you 4 case studies done independently by 4 different water utilities and show you their path. And a lot of them are here with us today, which is really great. So they're welcome to chime in anytime and or join the question and answer session, because we do want to have a little bit of dialogue at the end. So the first thing we looked at is, well, how are you going to get it done? So there's a lot of different ways you can go about that. You can use an intern. You can use junior staff. You can use senior staff. What staff level is required for this effort? Additional, you can outsource it. You can use a consultant. And what would that look like, and how would that be helpful? And then we also have been noticing that some people have distinguishments in their billing system and some people definitely do not. But by and large, even though we had 4 different approaches, which was kind of nice in all of our case studies, we had 4 case studies and each one used a different path. So I'll show you the intern, junior staff, senior staff, and consultant. But amazingly enough, they all landed on using Excel. So they just found it was easier to work in, easier to navigate, easier to sort, easier to put the categories off to the side, and also be flexible if the categories should change. What if throughout this process in 2023, they decide to add a category or take a category out? They decided to put in Excel just so that gives them the flexibility of changing things as needed. So one of the things I want to talk about is, yes, this is theoretically required through the legislation, or it appears that it's heading down that path. However, what is the point? Like, okay, I have to turn it in, but what value can I get out of it, if I'm going to go through this effort? So there's been some dialogue when this was originally raised that it would be using for benchmarking. And that's why we're here today, because if that is truly the goal of the state board and DWRs to use this data for benchmarking, then we really do have to be careful how we are going about putting all of our different water uses in these 19 categories. Because if we have everybody on this call doing it slightly different way, then all of a sudden the value of the benchmarking on the back is not going to be that good. Now scale it up to the fact that we have 400 utilities doing this in California. If we do it 400 different ways, then the benchmarks are not going to be that helpful. And so that's one thing that we're trying to work on as a team, is if we can kind of actually try this out and figure out a way to make it more consistent, then hopefully the benchmarks that come out after the analysis will be more useful for everybody. So that's kind of an overarching goal of taking this on now rather than after the rules are released, is to try and help shape the rules to make efficient benchmarks that are useful. The second thing is we've been working with a couple agencies, and they've been able to utilize this additional detail for demand projections. So demand projections, as we know, traditionally have followed our standard categories. Think urban water management plans. It's single family, multifamily, commercial on its own, and then sometimes people have just those 3. Some people might have commercial, industrial, institutional broken out, but that's where it stops. There isn't a further definition of how much water use is going to hotels, how much water use is going to education. So the added detail, if you start tracking by group, can definitely inform your water demand forecasts. because you can say, oh, look, I'm going to have more growth in hotels, or no, I think that category is going to be steady. So it just allows you that additional detail when you're looking forward into the future. And then it can also help you target programs. I'm going to show you a case study where if you know where your water use is going, how many customers are in that individual, category, like again, how many hotels, how many restaurants, you can start to look at the water use, look at and find outliers. Who's my highest, restaurant, and why not? Based on square footage or based on, other metrics like so many students for a school, then you can try and refine and target those for audits. So I'm going to show you all of that. But I really do think it's important to look at this, and let's work as a team to use this information multiple ways rather than just turning it into the state and, calling it good and not utilize the information that we've developed. So with that being said, I have 4 case studies. So first, Santa Barbara was willing to step forward, and thank you, and try this out. They utilized an intern kind of over the summer, and they dove in and they have done 1,600 of their accounts and meters out of 2,700. This does not include dedicated irrigation meters. The intern was able to do about 60 to 100 per day. That's also helpful to know, how long is this going to take this? How much of an effort is this? So of course, everyone is different sizes, but having kind of a rate can kind of help you and plan ahead and see how much work is involved. So how did they go about doing it? They used business license databases. They used industrial waste discharge information and permit holders. They used a solid waste database and Google Maps and aerial views of what looked like it was there. And then last but not least, GIS county parcel data. Now, Santa Barbara is a city, so they do have access to this information. Some of you may not be cities and may not have access to this information, but if you do, it's something that you could potentially utilize to help you kind of refine and determine what types of businesses these are. Because some of them aren't so obvious. If it's Smith & Jones LLC, what's that? How do I categorize that? So this is the process to go through, identify who they are. The waste discharge permits tend to be tied to restaurants and things that have, waste and are being monitored on the backside. And a lot of commercial facilities do fall into that category. So you could utilize that if you have access. And then I've deemed something called stumpers. Stumpers are, where did they get stuck? So we have these 19 predefined categories, but some things don't cleanly align or aren't clearly defined. Where do I put this? So that was kind of one of our goals, was to find out what data can we use and then where are we getting stuck. So I have that for each of the 4 case studies. And you'll see some commonalities, but Santa Barbara particularly ran into HOA, stands for homeowners associations, common areas. So the grass, in the clubhouses, where do we put that? Museums wasn't clearly defined in any of the categories. Gas stations, is it with a convenience store or a vehicle wash or an auto service? The gas stations have different characteristics, and then based on those characteristics, they could theoretically fall in multiple of the different 19 categories. So where do we put them? And do we divide them up? So post office, amazingly enough, can fit in multiple different categories, and parking lots and garages. So some of these seem, like, oh, you're only going to have a handful. But again, if all 400 of us are doing it different ways, that's going to start impacting our benchmarking. And then last but not least, some of the categories are kind of identical to the state, but not when we're kind of looking at how we're utilizing the information. So what they're recommending and what we're hoping to do as a group is to maybe recommend some refinements or changes. So laundry, for example, the recommended changes or edits that they've seen so far would be in blue here. So I've just highlighted a few of the 19. I don't have all 19 here, but I have some. And so dry cleaners could be added to laundry, for example. Offices, what about on-site services and banks? Because banks could potentially go under a different category as well. What about fire stations? Fire stations can use quite a bit of water, especially when they're doing their training. So where do those fit? Sales, convenience stores, gas stations with a convenience store. Obviously, they're selling drinks and food and things like that, which is more of a retail type situation than just selling gas. Because the gas itself, I mean, you're not really using a whole lot of water. And then sales, grocery store was the biggest one with food markets, and things like Trader Joe's, for example, would go potentially into sales. Services, what about veterinary? They actually use water a lot to wash their animals, before they groom, things like that. They can actually use quite a bit of water. And they have surgeries and things like that too. Private lessons, where does that go? Education. So that's very broad. So are we talking all of our schools? And what about daycare? So is that technically education, or would that be a service, or some of these other things? So again, just for their delineation. And last but not least, vehicle wash. A lot of the gas stations have car washes too. So you can obviously have dedicated car washes that do nothing but a car wash, but then you can also have gas stations with a car wash. So again, it's more looking at it from a water use perspective than a true hard definition of a gas station as a gas station. Well, you have to look a little bit deeper and look at what's actually there, and then put it in the appropriate water use category. So that does help if you take a water use viewpoint instead of just a straight definition of what's a gas station. All gas stations are going in one particular bucket. Oh, so Santa Barbara's here with us. Does Michael or Madeline want to chime in on anything? You're welcome to do so.
Hey, Michelle, it's Madeline. No, I think you
Hi.
did a good coverage of it. I think it's really about, the problem is when there's multiple buckets, and so some of them are still in our parking lot, which includes actual parking lots, but the gas stations is a good example. Sometimes it's a convenience store, sometimes they have auto services like smog and brakes, and sometimes they have a car wash. So sometimes it just takes that extra layer of looking at what they're offering.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Madeline, for being willing to dive in and continuing to work on it, and sharing it out so that we can all, take a look at it. So, and if there's any other questions, thank you for coming today too. Feel free, because we're going to have a dialogue at the end. So and Sierra, are there any questions in the chat so far?
No new ones. There's been a bit of dialogue about where to find the list, but no new questions.
Okay, great. Perfect. Oh, and it's coming. The list, I have an example and a link for that too. So the next example is Placer County in California. It's in Northern California. And they utilize junior staff to do their categorization. They had 2,700 accounts, and they're about halfway-ish. They have categorized 1,133 as of last Friday, and it's about 10 hours so far. They use a combination of their billing system and their NICS codes. They use Google Maps. They are grouping them by customer name. So they're looking in their billing system for school or for church, and then some of them that they just can't really sort of, that was my example, Smith & Jones LLC, not quite sure. And, or if Google, isn't defined, they will send staff out to verify it in the field. And I, again, have personally done this, and I had some issues where it was like, oh, well, my billing system says it's X, but then Google Maps shows me something else. So then you can get in this category of like, you're just not really sure. And so then that sometimes having staff verify can be very helpful for the handful that you just flag as the data doesn't align when you use multiple data sets. So similar to Santa Barbara, the stumper was what goes in each category. For certain properties, they had the same HOA and commercial meters. I didn't list them all here. I actually provided a slide of kind of how their counts are working out to kind of give you an indication of where we're seeing things. So again, commercial, industrial, municipal, you're going to have mostly commercial. most people have a little bit of a handful of industrial, and then you're going to end up with a bucket of municipal. And so this is their current count. So they just made the categories 1 through 19 and started putting things in each bucket. Dedicated meters, if you have those, would be definitely hopefully large if you've utilized those. But you can kind of see how they're starting to align. Sales does tend to be a large category, like I said, because a lot of stuff can fit in sales. Public services, actually, amazingly enough, tends to be kind of high too. So this just kind of gives you a flavor of as you start going through, and again, they're halfway through and we'll continue to build, but I think it's something to look at and just give you a feel for as you start categorizing, the buckets are going to start to grow. And this is another example of where you could start to use this data to target. So I mentioned that earlier. Okay, if you have this now and you're going to do water audits or water assessments, well, you can turn around and look at the number of customers. I'm also recommending one layer deeper. If you're going to do this, somehow have a way of tracking it carefully so you can attach water use to it so that you could align the number of customers with the water use. Because sometimes you'll have a huge amount of customers, but they're not using a whole lot of water like warehouses. Whereas another category like water recreation here might only have 5 customers, but they're using a large volume of water. So that's just something to consider. And here are some of their stumpers. I wrote them out. You can read them all, but the city is a good one. When you have a city property, you can have multiple things on one property. So how are we going to classify that? Because it can have all of the above, like a public service, an office. They had sewer lists, dedicated irrigation meters, and recreation non-water all under city. So is city going into the city bucket or like in the public sector bucket, or are we dividing them all out into the individual labels of office, for example? Even though something's a medical office like Smith Chiropractor, it was a healthcare office, but it had a garden. So how are we supposed to categorize the fact that it has irrigation use with it, which might, if we're looking at it from water use, make the benchmark for medical offices much higher if you're starting to add in, a large amount of irrigation in there. Homeowners associations with and without dedicated meters, very different water use profile. So again, if we're benchmarking, that might, give very different answers. But you can keep going. Banks, that one was listed on Santa Barbara's as well. It could go in 3 areas. It could go under sales, it could go under mixed use commercial if it's like in a strip mall, or it could also go under office. Because really it is office. You've got a building with people in it and a restroom. So where does it go? This one came up a couple times. Where do you put your energy provider? Pacific Gas and Electric is their energy provider. It could be utility, it could be office. So you kind of get the idea that there's certain things, and it was interesting that they independently also came up with gas stations, just like Santa Barbara. It could go in 3 areas: sales, mixed use commercial, and vehicle wash. So independently done, coming up with the same flavor in some areas. And so that's what we're going to try and work through and try and provide some guidance so that when we're done, we'll have a clean list to just follow. And then last but not least, fairgrounds with restaurants and preschool. So you could divide it multiple different ways. So before I move on, I believe Placer County is here too. Would you like to add anything?
Hey, Michelle, this is Michael. I think
Michael.
I think everything looks great. You captured, I think, the essence of what we found. And I think the next step for us is really probably going to look more at water use. So I don't think we've really dug in. So everything was just that initial, Google Maps, the NICS codes, all that stuff. So yeah, I think there's some more work to do, but we're learning.
Yep, as a team, right? Well, thank you, Michael, for coming today, and thanks for being here and joining the dialogue. So, so if there's anything else, then we'll move on to a couple other case studies. So we went outside of California, and I know this is a mostly dominant California call, but we decided to explore a little bit beyond our borders. And the reason we were looking at that was because we realized if we do a good job, California tends to lead in a lot of areas and be proactive. But I wanted to look not only today and tomorrow, but a little bit further out, that if we come up with the benchmarking strategy for our industry, is it going to work like for the rest of the country? Like if the Alliance for Water Efficiency chooses to adopt what we're doing in California, how is that going to fare when we hit someone in Texas? So I have 2 out-of-state examples, and I have a bonus of we used different structures of how we got the work done, and also they had different resources available. So when we were working in San Antonio, they're a large city in Texas. They use their senior staff. So they have a data analyst. She's quite talented, and they had a database. So they were kind of set up for this. They also have 35,000 accounts, right? So now we're talking large, but if we're looking at our country and even in the state of California, we do have some quite large utilities. So how does that look when we're trying to do more than just 1,500 or 2,000? So database is helpful, as we're hearing. And then they also stayed to the NICS codes, which is helpful if we do kind of center around that it could translate well kind of across the country to use something like NICS codes. We did run into something though. We ran into that they have their own categorization in the state of Texas. It's developed by the Texas Water Development Board. And it doesn't align with the DWR categories. They're not too far off. They do have some like recreation areas and whatever, but they actually have 33 different sections, not 19. And so we kind of literally went through, had them categorize everything, and we created 2 different columns. One with the Texas Water Development Board categorization and a separate one with California. They were willing to do that so we could see the differences. So that's something that we may bring back and review, and maybe we add a few more so that we can better align overall, and or think about, there was an entirely different body that's gone ahead of us and already done this, and did they have some insight into areas that we can kind of clean up our 19 buckets and make them a little bit clearer. So for the benefit of all, we do have that. And then they used a NICS code in internal database, like I said. So they have been using it to refine their water demand forecast. So they don't have the state of California regulations kind of coming down, to require it, but they did find it useful and really did appreciate that extra level of detail when we were working. We worked with them on their water demand forecast, and it did add an extra layer of detail that they found very, very useful, because then they could say, oh, well, we're not going to add any more water parks. We're done there. However, we are going to be adding a lot more, hotels, and we need a few more hospitals as we grow and things like that. We were able to individually increase those categories. So that's San Antonio, Texas. We also worked in Salt Lake City, Utah. So those 3 first case studies were done internally. This one was done externally. It was done by a consultant, not us, a different consultant. And it was great to watch how that process worked. That consultant happened to have and been leading their GIS database. They had also had access to parcel information. So it just made sense for them to lead this effort because they already had access to so much information. So they did utilize the consultant to help them classify them. They're also on the largest size. They have 12,000 to 14,000 accounts. And they were willing to do the 19 categories. So they did. They organized their information by our categories. They ran into some of the same exact stumbling blocks. I should say both groups did. So in San Antonio, they ran into that beverage example I was talking about. Well, I have a large beverage manufacturer, happen to be Budweiser. If I put Budweiser in the beverage and food section, it overwhelmed the entire category. So we're looking for benchmarking. If you put one account in there, it totally swamped all of the rest. So that's when we realized, and we're talking to both San Antonio and Salt Lake about, when we have these decisions, look at it from a water use perspective. It didn't make sense to put a large beverage manufacturer into a category that was mostly restaurants, essentially, because then the benchmarks wouldn't really line up very well. And same thing in Salt Lake City, Utah. They have some beverage manufacturers as well, some breweries and things like that. If they put those breweries in with the beverage section, same problem. It really ended up overwhelming the rest of the categories. So we were recommending, by and large, look at it from a water use perspective. Does that make sense? Does it make sense to put in a brewery or a large beverage manufacturer in with food and beverage? And if it doesn't really conform to the rest of the group, then maybe that's not the best fit and you would kick it to manufacturing. That was kind of one way to decide what was manufacturing versus not manufacturing. And for them, they were doing a commercial water audit and rebate program. Salt Lake is working on that, and it's actually a pilot for the whole state of Utah. And they found that the 19 categories really did help refine and look at which group of customers should, or could be more water efficient in number and also water use, like I was saying. So they did attach their water use with these categorizations, and were able to look at it and decide which area to target. So it helps commercial targeting, which eventually will flow into the best management practices, which is to, kind of work with your customers. So this is one step, and an important step in that direction. So with that was my 4th case study. Are there any questions about my case studies before we start talking about next steps and how to join the discussion? Sarah, are there any questions?
No questions in the chat, but if anybody wants to raise their hand, go for it.
Okay, I'm sensing that's, we got one. Hey, Deb, I see you. Deb Lane, go ahead.
Hi there.
Hi.
Thanks. That was a really helpful presentation. So I'm curious about Placer County and the garden in the back and what you're doing. It made me just think about all of our mixed use meters, where we'll probably have a cap. And I mean, where are you ending up putting those? I mean, what if we've got more water use, if the cap's high and the garden's water intensive, the landscape versus, and it's an office building, right? So
Yeah.
what are we doing about, what are you all doing about that is one of my questions, or thoughts about that.
I'll let Michael chime in. She's was the one that found the first, that was the Placer County. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so really we stumbled across it because we were looking at their 2021 water use, and we were just in Excel sorting these businesses and just noticed the water use was really high. And so Linda just had a staff member go check it out, and he just happened to notice the garden in the back. And so I think what we are going to do is hold some of those. I love what Michelle called them, the stumpers. And so we're going to just create a little small internal committee. And as we work these definitions out, we'll just kind of get together, and just the real stumpers will probably get together and just figure out a category. I don't think we've categorized that one yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Put it in the parking lot. There's a joke, right? Put it in the parking lot. I'm like, what do I do with this?
Right.
AKA stumpers. But yeah, that's where we're trying to uncover them, right? I mean, that's ultimately the goal. I'm so glad that you asked the question, Deb, because that's what we're trying to do, and see if we're stumbling on the same ones, right? Then, okay, we definitely need to address this for like the overall group. It may not solve all your individual service area questions, but if we can head this off, that would be helpful. So there is supposed to be a guidebook that's supposed to come out, that's supposed to help us with this process. So we're trying to get smart and maybe inform that guidebook process is ultimately where we're trying to go with this.
Right. I mean, we will, not on all of them, but and then I come across plenty of our CII accounts that we don't know there's actually irrigation on them, but in a lot of them, I mean, because we're a retailer and the billing department's part of the water department, we can collaborate pretty easily. But so I can look if there's a cap, right? And then I'm thinking in my mind, well, because it's going to get complicated, but yeah, which account has a cap? What is the cap, and how does this look in comparison to their water use? And then where do you categorize it? right?
Mhm.
So that's a complicated one. And then also, sorry, my phone's ringing and I'm getting all these texts and phone calls all at the same time while I'm talking. Yeah, that's just a tough one to figure out. And then I had one other question too on San Antonio. You talked about their internal database. Can you speak
Yeah.
to what that is? You said that was very helpful. What does that mean exactly?
Great question, and they're very willing to share. I didn't in the interest of time today, but and they're intending actually to join our and I can have them. I can ask Martha Davis is the one working on it, and she can show us a copy. So they have taken and put all of their accounts into a database that then they can query. So it's an export from the billing system that they download everything, because what the problem was is the billing system just wasn't easy to navigate and wasn't easy to use and was complicated. And so they get an export of the billing information, they dump it into the database, and then the database is searchable. And then they have specific fields where they try and, like what we're trying to do, define what they are. And in addition to, like, meter numbers and, additional information about the sites. They also add in their rebate activity from the past. So it's basically their warehouse of each account and what's happened to it, water use wise, categorization wise, rebate participation wise. So it's basically, they don't have AMI yet. They are on the path like the rest of many of you, but it's been a great data storage for all this information that they can't possibly put in the billing database because there's no fields for it. There's no tracking. It's like like a lot of billing systems fixed. So it's their conservation-led internal database to track anything and everything they couldn't get in the billing system. Does that help? And then they query it, which is great. So
That does sound very helpful.
yeah, I know a lot of you either have it or thinking of it or wishing you had one, right? So some variation thereof. So that may also be something that comes out of this whole process of, how and what do we store and where do we store it and what's a good idea and how do we manage it, moving forward. So yeah,
All
good
right, thank
question.
you.
Yeah, no problem. And I can ask Martha to come. She's willing to join this group, even though it's a California group. They're like, "Hey, can we come in?" We're like, "Sure, please join us." Because I'm always trying to think 3 steps ahead, for the bigger good of everybody. If I mean, wouldn't it be amazing if we could benchmark, like a lot, more like they do in Energy Star Portfolio Manager on the Energy Star. They've been, tracking and benchmarking for a while. It's a little trickier on the water side, but we're finally taking it on and want to do it as a group. The more data we have, the better we fare. So good questions. Any other, Deb, or was that the?
No, that's it for now. Thank you.
Okay, great. And that was Deb from City of Santa Rosa. I'm noticing people are speaking up, not chiming in where they're from, but thank you. So any other questions or comments?
None in the chat at this moment.
Okay, great. Well, our goal is to pay it forward to the group. What we are trying to do is have a discussion, use these 4 case studies, and get a few more. So if you're willing to join us, and it can come one of 3 ways. One, just show up and join the dialogue like Deb did, ask some questions, maybe kind of work through or brainstorm how we want to work through this as a group, what makes sense. Second of all, if you're willing to process your data, and at least some of it, you don't have to do all of it, but if you're willing to take a crack at it, even using the information we've learned so far, we'd love to have you join us. We have 4. I'd love to have more than 4. I don't have any in the San Diego region yet, or in Southern California for that matter. And I have 1 Northern California, I have 1 Central, but I don't really have anyone Southern California. So I'm looking for a volunteer. We will help guide you. We will, be a team. But if you've got someone willing to do it, we'll give you all the tips and tricks. I would like to come back with at least a few more case studies. The more we have, the stronger we can become. The ultimate vision is that CalWIP is willing to dive into this with us, and maybe write up what we find and then pitch it back as, hey, here's what we recommend. Can you please include this in your guidebook? Or can you please utilize this information as you develop your guidebook, so that ultimately at the end we have a good solid process, and that we don't have 400 people doing it 400 different ways, because then that's going to be a real disappointment, I think, for all of us when we don't end up with benchmarks, which is the number one thing they've said they wanted, was benchmarking. And I don't want us to also have benchmarks out there that just aren't realistic, you know. I'd rather it make sense. If we put all restaurants together the same way, then we're all similar. We didn't have one person put beverage and their benchmark is so much higher, and they're like, oh, they're inefficient. Well, no, they just categorize it to things differently. So I'm trying to get away from that. So if you'd like to join us, we are going to have a kickoff meeting. It's November 14th from 1 to 2:30. If you want in, all you have to do is email myself or Lisa, or you can put it in the chat. That works too. And we'd love for you to join us. I promise, even if you just want to come and brainstorm with us, the more people we have participating, the better, just so that we can work as a team and hopefully make this process better. So anything else in the chat on this, Sierra, before we move on?
Nothing at this time. I will go ahead and post those emails just so it's a little easier for people if you want to shoot an email over.
Great, thank you. And Lisa Cuellar, I think you're here too. Did you want to add anything else from the CalWEP perspective?
Hi, Michelle. Yeah, thanks for that wonderful summary. I think you nailed it. The overall objective is to draft our own, I guess, mini guidance document that would most likely be produced before the DWR guidance. And open invitation, anybody who's interested on this particular topic, or maybe has had some experience trying to tackle this reclassification. We would really love to learn from you and get questions too. If you're stumped, we want to know what's stumping you and how we can, collectively come up with a solution. So
great.
Please reach out.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa, and thanks for being here. So basically join us, welcome, join us. The more of us we have together, the stronger we'll become, and hopefully be more helpful to the group overall. All right, so that's CII classification. There will be more to come. So again, we've done 2 topics in depth so far. Lisa Cuellar, who just spoke on our workshop 8, went into the dedicated irrigation meters. If you want a copy of that workshop, it is recorded. Let us know. We're happy to share it out. If you want workshop recordings from any of the other ones, let us know. And we have those. And then also we'll probably in the future do a little bit of a dive on the best management practices, which would be the 3rd topic once the additional supported materials are released. So with that, I'm going to segue right into my next comment, which is, where do we get everything? I've had a lot of comments on that. So I made a resource cheat sheet. So there's a lot of great resources for you. I could have put 15 on here, but I summed it up to the ones that I think you may look into. So CalWEP has done a nice job on MUM conversion, and they have some resources. They do have a blog too, which we've showed a couple times before with the framework. And so on the website, they have this information and also the framework, which may be helpful for you to kind of give you a little bit of a primer, especially if you're new. I've heard a lot of you are new. Welcome to your new positions. Hopefully this sheet is kind of helpful for you. And although those are seasoned, some people are like, where is that located again? So yeah, they have buried things in a couple different locations that I've highlighted here. So the state and DWR have come together and released the primer in 2018. That was originally released. It's still helpful. It does state literally what was originally came out, what really is written in legislation. So it's a good resource to kind of look back at as we kind of get into the details on all these in the weeds, to step back and say, okay, and or if your board needs it. Now, as we're getting closer, can people like, what is this? It is written to be digestible by others. So if you need that primer, it's there for you and you can share it out as needed. And then the recommendations to the state board memo came out. As Elizabeth mentioned, it was released on September 29th, and that is available. It's a few pages. We're still waiting on the backup. It just summarizes kind of the latest and greatest on the individual elements that Elizabeth did show earlier. She highlighted in purple text anything that had changed since our earlier discussions. So that is the latest and greatest that we have. And stay tuned for, I think it's 60 documents coming out. So it's going to be one large packet of information. And when we see it come out, maybe we can send out an email to the group and let you know it's been released. But that's where everything is posted. The Urban Water Use Efficiency Standards variances also has some information. So we posted where that is. Again, Elizabeth mentioned that some of the details on the variances are not quite clear. So when that comes out, that might be useful. Last but not least, another place to go, which I heard earlier a few times, they were talking about evapotranspiration and information and tool and the calculators. Only thing that's been released so far on that is the Water Use Objective Exploratory Tool. It's draft, it is not final. It functions on 17, 18, and 19 data, but it gives you an idea of calculating your urban water use objective. If you haven't been there yet, check it out. It does list the water suppliers and gives kind of an idea of where you're sitting. Again, it can change, but it does give a kind of an insight into where that is. And I listed where it is. It's a little bit buried, and a few people have been like, where is that located? So here's that tip and trick location for you. So hopefully that's helpful. And again, we'll try and stay in touch when we see two things I think will come out in the near future. One would be the water law standards, which supposedly are adopting tomorrow, like we mentioned. And then second of all, watch for that large packet coming out. And so we'll try and allude to when those come out. So last but not least, we want to hear from you. So these workshops were developed to be supportive. We understand it's been really difficult with so many different long 8-hour type meetings on 9 different topics. So this was meant to be a clearinghouse to bring it all together. If you haven't been able to go, or you just don't have the staff to go, or you just literally cannot go to them all. And then second of all, be able to talk about it. Like, what does that mean? How does that impact me? And a lot of the meetings were more one directional, or like you had a chat, but you can ask questions. And so this was supposed to be a forum for that. As we're getting closer to having some regulations, we do want to switch gears a little bit on our road trip. And we would like to start helping you, like, and really dive into some of the tools and the implementation. We're going to have more. We're not stopping. We are going to have an additional series starting in January of the next year. And so what we would like to do is ask you what would be most helpful. We're here for you, essentially, as a group. And we have had in the past even live sessions where we said, okay, choose your own adventure. Here's the water tool calculator. And we had 3 levels. One level was, I don't even know where to find the data. The second level was, I've got the data, I don't know what to do with the data. And the third one was like, I've got the data, I've already calculated, I want to talk about it. So we've had different level breakout rooms. We're really open to suggestions on how to be the most helpful as we all navigate this as a group. So we did do a survey in March. We had 20 people take it. This is the results from that survey. What we would like to do today, being that we've had 60 more of you, today is to ask, and this was 6 months ago in March. Again, Elizabeth mentioned we got a little stuck in traffic as we were waiting for everything, but now that we're kind of going again, wanted to check back in since it's been 6 months on what do you think would be most helpful for you. And so what we're going to do today is take a look at all of these elements again, and then please vote. If you voted before, that's fine. You can revote. And we also have your information if you've done it. But I really like you to take the flash survey that we're going to do, because I'm also asking a bonus question now about how are we doing on our commercial side. So I just went into a long dialogue about the different practices, how you can do it. And I'm asking a simple question. Have you done it yet? Where are you at in the process? And how's it going for you? So what we're going to do is we're going to do a flash survey. A flash survey means you're going to do it right now. I'm going to give you a little time because I know it's hard when you leave meetings and you get pulled into all these different things. So we're going to put in the chat box a Google form. It only has 2 questions. So this is not a hard survey and you're not graded on it. But I really appreciate your feedback. This is definitely going to structure the future of the next workshop. So this is your chance to have a voice. I'd really like to hear from you. Again, 2 questions. First question is about what topics you'd like. The second one is a follow-on on the commercial side. just so that we can see where everybody is at in the process. And that would be super helpful. So with that, we'll post it in the chat. If anyone isn't getting it, raise your hand. You should be able to open it up. It's a Google form. And then I'm going to give you a couple minutes to go ahead and fill that out. Any questions?
And while Nikki gets that posted in the chat, we do have a couple of questions. Gabriella would like to know, where can we get the slides from today's meeting?
Oh, good question. We do send them out. So if you got the original invitation from Joni from the San Diego County Water Authority, if you're on that distribution list, you should definitely get a copy of that and a copy of the recording as well. If you don't and you haven't seen an email from Joni, please put your email in the chat. Let us know and we are happy to add you. It is open. Anyone at this point is allowed to come and anyone is allowed access to the material. So definitely not just San Diego. They've allowed anyone and everyone who's interested and want this information to come. So it will be distributed after the meeting.
And then that also addresses Tennille's first question, but she also asked, can we take the survey after the meeting?
Yes, you can.
Great.
We will keep it open. Any other questions? Thank you, Sierra.
No, just anybody else who wants to get the materials who aren't on Joni's list, please do put your email in there, and I'm copying and pasting those and saving those now.
Yeah. And we also can open up the questions to anything else as well. And I'm super excited to hear from you what's going to be most helpful. And we do have more material after the flash survey. So I'll put this back up just for reference. Not that you have to vote the same, but just you can kind of see where the group was heading at that point. If anyone has challenges with the Google survey, just let us know. We have Nikki Powell from the Manaus Water Management team on the line, and she created the survey and is happy to address any questions, comments, or concern. She can also email it to you directly if somehow it's not opening up for any reason. Just put that in the chat. She can email it to you directly.
We do have one person who can't access Google Docs at work due to IT policies. So I'm not sure if we can recreate this or.
Well, we could turn around and these are the, I guess we could pull it up too, and then they could take a screenshot. So creative. Hey, Nikki, do you want to pull it up on your screen? And then I could share your screen. And then those are the questions. They could take a screenshot and then just answer them. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. You can go ahead and pull it up on your screen. And then whoever can't access it, if anyone can't access it, or if you're curious, you know, Tennille or someone that's not taking it now, what's in there, then we can go ahead and you can see the two questions. There's two questions. What topic are most interesting to you and what are the commercial survey items? And then we can go ahead and have whoever that is take a screenshot and then fill it in that way. That works too. We're really just after your feedback, however we can get it. you want to share your screen, Nikki, or do you want me to pull it up?
I have it up. Just give me one moment.
Actually, I have it. I can show it. I got it. So there we go. So here are, it's just your name and agency name. And then just 2 questions. So all you have to do is click all that apply. So the person that can't do Google Docs, what you can do is take a screen capture of this, either with your phone or with your computer, and then you can just answer the questions and send it in. You can literally like print it out, mark it, and scan it, or take a picture, however it works easiest with you, and then we're happy to add you to the mix. We want to hear everyone's voice. So I'll leave that up for just a minute in case there's any of the others of you that have that issue, and then we'll go right back into our dialogue. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead. I think everyone's probably had enough time to fill in the survey. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to our presentation so we can finish our last few things. All right. So thank you for your feedback and for your time. We will leave it open, I would say, through Friday. So feel free, if you didn't have a chance today to take it, or you couldn't, or technology-wise couldn't do it, feel free to go ahead and fill it in before Friday. So we do have a workshop number 10 coming. We are planning on January 2023. We haven't set the date yet, but we will. Might be a little bit dependent on the timing of when the state board plans to restart their information. But again, we will incorporate your feedback that you did give us from the survey. So topic will be determined, and thank you so much for your feedback. And we will definitely take that into consideration as we create the next one. So it'll be fun for us to see what you guys prefer. All right, so keep your eyes peeled from a note from Joni. If you don't hear anything, let us know. You can email me and or mention it, and then we will make sure that you get back on the distribution list. All right, so wrapping up, are there any questions on any topic that we have covered today? We've covered a lot, 9 different steps. We've covered water loss, covered classification. Any questions on any topic? Or any questions that we might not have answered earlier? All right, I guess we did a good job answering all the questions. If you have any, feel free to chime in, but I would say stay tuned. A lot of information coming up, a lot of work to be done. So this gives us a little insight into 2023. And I don't know, Elizabeth, if you want to chime in or if you just want me to continue wrapping it up.
You can go ahead and keep wrapping it up.
All right, I got this. So yeah, so the next thing is just kind of an overview. This was what was shared by the State Water Resources Control Board. Charlotte Eli gave this presentation to the California Water Efficiency Partnerships plenary, fall plenary, and she shared the schedule with us. So we are sharing it with you. Basically, they said they are going to start the rulemaking January through March of 2023. There will be a comment, and it says in small font, first public comment period. So keep your eyes out for everything that comes out and be ready to comment. Second comment period will be May through July. Then there will be an adoption hearing early fall of 2023, and then a submittal to the legislature in fall of 2023, late fall, and then the rulemaking would be effective in January of 2024. This is keeping us on track. However, they do recognize that they're about 1 year behind. So therefore, there is a chance that they may request an extension. It would take an act of legislature at this point, so we can't guarantee that, but it has been, and she brought it up, part of the discussion. But for now, this is what we know, and we are going to keep marching to this until we are told that we have other instructions. So that's the latest and greatest that we have from the California Water Board. So again, we'll be switching gears. So most of the last couple of years, we've been working with Department of Water Resources, working on these documents, reports, technical backup. Now we're going to be switching into the State Water Resources Control Board and the rulemaking and the kind of regulations that we will be following. So stay tuned. Hope you follow it. We will be with you along the way and happy to address questions and be supportive as we all kind of navigate this. But again, if at all possible, I know everyone's busy, but if you can join things like the CalWEP Task Force or show up to the Water Loss San Diego meeting, things like that, and start getting your data together, I think Elizabeth and I can agree it's a good idea. It's going to be a heavy lift. So if you sit back and wait for everything to be final, then it's going to be really tough on you later. So the sooner you start, the easier it will become. And we kind of definitely have a vision. It's all the details haven't been kind of sorted, but you know, the vision's been kind of shared for quite some time, and hopefully we've helped outline how for you guys to stay on the road. So any questions on the timeline or anything else related to the switch and the traffic, switching lanes? How about that? Ooh, that should be a good line. Switching lanes. There we go. State Water Board. Does anybody have any questions? It's a good one to ask Elizabeth. Does anybody have any questions on the dynamics between the two groups and the State Water Board? If you're not familiar, this is a great time to ask. All right, I don't hear any questions. So with that, I'm going to give you 8 more minutes back in your day if there aren't any last questions. But definitely, if you haven't filled in the survey, I'm giving you 8 more minutes to do it now too, bonus, so you can do it after the call. We really would love to hear your feedback. You can also shoot us emails if you want to add something in addition to what you see on the Google survey. We're here. Look forward to working with you guys as we continue forward. So Elizabeth, any other last parting comments?
Nope, it's going to be a busy year next year. You know, again, State Board, one of the things we've heard over and over from them is quantify data. So if you see you have an issue with anything that we've discussed today or anything you've seen on the proposed regulations, you know, you saw that timeline. We're not going to have a lot of time to respond. Start putting together your numbers today, even if it's a rough estimate. You know, how much staff time it might take, or you know, what don't you have that you would need to be able to get. Having that information and providing that information is going to go farther than just kind of identifying any issues. So kind of quantifying what the issue is going to be really important as we talk to the State Board. So thank you very much again, all of you, for participating. We really appreciate it. And if you have any questions or on any of this, feel free to reach out to us.
Great. Thank you all, and hope you have a great day.
Thanks.